The Stellaron Hunters are by this point a household fixture in Star Rail and have been around since the very beginning of the game. In fact, Kafka and Silverwolf are actually the very first characters we see on screen even before the lovable trio of the main character, March and Dan Heng are introduced. Despite having been to several planets by now, we have only had a trickle of lore related to the group, especially when it came to its individual members. After Penacony 2.3, however, we know enough about them that I can finally cover them in a bit more detail. So in this video, we are going to talk about all the members of the Stellaron Hunters. We'll discuss their past, motivation, future goals, and what might happen to them at the end of the story. Well, everyone except for Elio. Before we dive into that, however, if you want to see more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Let's first talk about the group itself and why this ragtag bunch of randos decided to band together under the direction of an all-knowing cat. The Stellaron Hunters are an infamous group of criminals who are known to have went around the cosmos collecting Stellarons, hence their name. They consist of 4 main members, all of whom take direction from their leader and founder Elio. Truth be told, we don't actually know what their master plan is. In fact, the most we know about is that they are intending to prevent Nanook from destroying the universe, which, according to Kafka, will happen sometime in the future. The only reason they happen to know this is because Elio is heavily implied to be following the path of finality and the Eon Terminus. Through this association, Elio is said to be able to see the many branching possibilities of the future. Since Terminus is said to be bringing about a very specific end, I can only surmise that Elio is perhaps trying to accomplish something similar, but it's not out of the question to think that he might have a goal all his own. Regardless, because of this plan, Elio has had the Stellaron Hunters functionally hunt and collect Stellarons. We don't know why these cancerous things are central to his plan, but personally, I think it has something to do with changing fate. Firefly mentions that almost, if not all, of Elio's schemes revolve around a Stellaron in some way, and given there are hints that fate is predefined, I just happen to think that the Stellarons enable Elio to change the future or bend fate. But that's just my own headcanon, and I've talked about this idea a lot in other videos. With the introduction of the main character, it's also said that now most of their plan revolves around them, and their plan has somewhat shifted to making the main character the hero, collecting allies for them, and eventually preparing them to take on Nanook. While each member does follow the plans Elio comes up with, each of them actually have their own goals. It's probably safe to assume that they perhaps don't particularly care about what Elio wants, and are just working with him and each other to achieve their own personal goals. It kinda reminds me of the Straw Hat Pirates from One Piece, as each of them have a different dream from their own captain and they just happen to be working together. While most of the universe considers them dangerous, this is mostly due to the bounties that the IPC have placed on them. In fact, the Stellaron Hunters aren't necessarily evil and have done things that actually benefit the universe as a whole, such as when they toppled the Japella Brotherhood and helped with freeing people from Sunday's dream in Penacony. Though for the Penacony one, I suspect that they didn't want their investment, the main character, to be stuck in a dream permanently and likely save them because of this rather than wanting to save Penacony itself. But that's enough on the group as a whole. This video is about the individual members after all, so let's start with the proverbial second in command, the ever-enchanting Kafka. Very little is known about Kafka's past, but she has mentioned that she hails from a planet known as Sturgis 5 and that she was once a devil hunter. Humans from this planet do not know what fear is, and because of this, they become dominated by desire and pleasure, functionally becoming devils. It's unclear what her role as a devil hunter entails, but from context, she likely apprehends those that have gone too far in their pursuit of their own desires. She mentions that when Elio first found her, she was actually on a mission to hunt down some devils. Her backstory really reminds me of Chainsaw Man, and given the frequent comparison of herself to Makima, I honestly can't unsee it. Anyways, because she is from this planet, Kafka herself does not have the ability to feel fear, and this is why she largely joined up with Elio. Because of her lack of fear, she claims that she has an empty space in her mind and heart, and to change this is impossible just by herself. This is what Elio offers her, the ability to gain these things so long as she follows his instructions. Elio goes on to say that Kafka's fate is largely interwoven with that of the Trailblazer, and in the future, the main character will be the one who can eventually change Kafka. As far as Kafka is concerned, she and the main character are linked by destiny and why she is protective of them. Now, how this will actually transpire is really anyone's guess, but I have this rather weird feeling that at some point, the main character will be in a life-threatening situation, and this might be the moment Kafka actually feels true fear, the fear of losing them. Perhaps this might even lead Kafka to sacrificing herself to save them, though I'm pretty sure most of you will be up in arms about that. Whatever it might be, the main character, according to Elio, will be the one to fundamentally change Kafka. We're just not sure how that might play out. In any case, let's move on to the next member, one who has followed Elio for some time and is the default bruiser/berserker of their group, Blade. Blade's story is one that I'm sure most of you are already familiar with. His backstory is linked to many of the people we know like Dan Heng, Jing Yuan, Jing Liu, and many of the Xianzhou Alliance. The gist of it is that he once belonged to a legendary group of heroes known as the High Cloud Quintet. He joined them after being rescued by one of their members, Bai Heng, as his planet was decimated by the followers of Abundance. Blade had a knack for crafting the most amazing weapons, one that even the long-lived species of the Alliance could not even dream of. He was the one to arm and equip those from the Quintet, and he followed them on their excursions, eventually becoming one of them. Much later on, the person who had rescued him and become one of his closest friends, Bai Heng, died during a fight with an emanator of Abundance. Because they could not bear with the grief, Dan Feng, another member, sought to resurrect her and got the help of Blade, who at the time was known as Ying Xing. Long story short, the plan failed, and Blade was cursed with immortality. On top of that, he was also branded as a criminal by the Xianzhou Alliance, and eventually, due to his immortal life, even contracted the Mara. Blade leads a life of pure suffering, not able to remember who he is, the past he shared with the Quintet, or pretty much anything. He is driven only by his hatred for Dan Feng for turning him into what he is now. Blade really has only two goals. One is to get revenge on Dan Feng, and the second is to die. After the events of the Xianzhou Luofu, he has made some peace with Dan Feng's reincarnation, Dan Heng, so his sole wish right now is just really to pass on. Blade's mind is functionally mush at this point, and he can only continue to function due to Kafka's hypnotic suggestion ability. Elio has promised that by the end, Blade will achieve the peaceful death he is searching for, and beyond that, I don't think there is anything else. I still see him aiding the Stellaron Hunters though till his very last days, but I honestly have no idea how Elio might make his goal a reality. Perhaps at some point they will make use of his body, which is infused with abundance energy, to fulfill their goal, or perhaps they will ask him to sacrifice himself to save the group, but again, these are just assumptions. Next up, we have Sam, or better known as Firefly. If you have been keeping up with Penacony, all the trailers, and some of the lore related to Glamoth, you probably already know much of her backstory. I've also covered some of these in other videos, but again, most of the trailers related to Firefly have done a good enough job of explaining her rather tragic past. Essentially, the Republic of Glamoth was once a world that was plagued by the swarm of propagation. The situation was so dire that those of the Republic resorted to manufacturing soldiers. Soldiers who would wield mechanical suits to combat the bugs and were known as the Iron Cavalry of Glamoth. Now, on the surface, you might get where these rulers of Glamoth were coming from. After all, they were besieged on all sides by bugs the size of buildings. But when they manufactured these soldiers, to keep them under control, they made some rather questionable choices. First of all, most of these soldiers were tricked into believing they served a different world altogether and were bound to the empress of this fictitious world called Titania. Then, because of all the genetic modification they had to undergo, most of them essentially became stricken with entropy loss syndrome. These soldiers, most of whom appear as young adults if not outright kids, could not dream, was tied to a goal they had no control over, and basically had shortened lifespans. The only life they knew was that of the battlefield, with endless battles and seeing each of their comrades die day after day. Eventually, this curtain of lies would be lifted. The war ended and the Republic ceased to exist. The remnants of the cavalry though had lost their purpose and were left to die off in a universe they barely knew. This brings us to what Firefly wants the most, which after that depressing backstory you likely already know. Simply put, she wants to live longer. While she considers her fate one that is difficult to change, joining the Stellaron Hunters was her way of circumventing this fate. She wanted a more meaningful life, one where she could experience everything for herself and maybe even spend some time with the main character. We see her pursue this in 2.3 when she approached Jade for a solution, and while Jade likely knew of a cure, since Firefly had nothing to give up, in return, she would need to continue her search for an answer elsewhere. It's very likely that Elio promises that if she followed his instructions, much like Kafka, it would lead her to the solution she was looking for. For now though, it's really a question of whether she will find an answer before her time is up. Last on this list is Silver Wolf. While most of the hunters so far each have a very specific goal they wish to accomplish, Silver Wolf doesn't really seem to have one. In fact, most of how she operates is largely akin to how a follower of Elation might operate. She's only doing these things to satiate her pursuit of entertainment. From her character story, we learn that Silver Wolf views life and existence as a game, one to be played and enjoyed, and once the challenge is gone, you move on to the next one. She is the epitome of doing something because she can rather than if she should. Silver Wolf had reached the peak of what she could achieve on Punklord and was regarded as a legendary hacker, though without a goal to work towards, life wasn't as fun. When the Stellaron Hunters appeared before her, she joined without much hesitation and likely was just promised the prospect of a good time. While the three members we have spoken about all have a goal that Elio is supposedly helping them attain, Silver Wolf doesn't seem to have one. She likely joined them purely to have fun, as these four people were likely going to turn the world upside down, and to a Punklordian hacker, that's about as much fun as you can possibly get. Now, before I end this video, there is actually two more members that we should talk about. The first is Elio himself, though whether he counts as a member is pretty much semantics, but he is indeed the group's founder and leader. Not much can be said about him as we still don't know what his ultimate goal is. As I mentioned earlier in the video, it's either he wants to change fate itself or bring about a specific ending, much like what Terminus wants. I would wager that it's some combination of these things. Perhaps the end Terminus is working towards is the pre-fated one, and Elio wants an ending that benefits him specifically. This might be why he is using the main character and Stellarons to bend fate to his advantage, but at the same time follows Terminus so that he can see the future branches. I just don't think he is someone who would follow Terminus without question and likely has something up his sleeves. Given we have talked about Elio, who could the other person be? Earlier I mentioned that there are two more members to talk about, right? Well, the last and sixth member is the Trailblazer themselves. They are an unofficial member given they were trained by Kafka and Blade and even stayed with the Hunters for some time. Now, I don't know if the main character has a goal or dream given they were artificially created for a specific purpose. Perhaps Elio only sees them as a tool, but I suspect that with how attached some of the members are to them, at some point, the Stellaron Hunters might willingly choose to betray Elio if the main character is in enough trouble. I mean, maybe Elio wants to sacrifice them or something for his ultimate goals. The way the story is going, the Hunters seem like allies, but we have to remember that Elio might have other plans entirely. I think that the more the story progresses, the more attached the members become to the main character, so much so that they might even cast away their dreams to help him. But that's just one idea out of a myriad of others. It could be equally likely that all that happens is that they work together and Elio is actually a stand-up cat. I mean guy. Truth be told, we just don't know. There's a lot of potential directions the story can take, and while we know most of the members' goals and motivations, we can't accurately assume how these facts may change the course of the story. What we do know is that each member seems to have something they really want, and only Elio is able to help them achieve their goals, which is why they function as a group. But with that, I'll bring this video to a close. The Stellaron Hunters are without a doubt one of my more favorite factions, as each person has a unique quality that makes them entertaining to follow. I hope we get more on them moving forward. I don't know, maybe a prequel anime or something. Come on, Hoyovers, get on that. Do you think the Hunters will split off by the end, or would they each get what they want? Let me know in the comments. If you had fun watching the video, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.